Today we'll be giving the first stage Pseudo Legendaries from generation 1 to 3 a future and past paradox form. I really enjoyed making both forms for the evolutions, so I decided to do that for these as well. Our first transformation will be for Dratini, since we're doing these in a chronological manner. I want to start by mentioning some huge critique we received in the last weeks, which was that I traced my pieces in order to make them look the best I could. The critique was that I shouldn't trace because they felt like it's a super bad thing to do. I still think tracing was the only reason why I improved as much as I did so far, but I agree, I have to put my pride aside and listen to the feedback. From now on, I will try my best to draw every Pokemon without tracing, but for now I will still recreate the poses from the reference pieces. I believe this is the next logical step in my improvement, and once we perfected that, we'll move on to our own poses. Okay, on to the actual drawing now. We started out by drawing in the head shape, and we immediately changed his mouth into a more dinosaur looking one. We also made sure to change his body into an actual snake shape, a cobra to be specific. The next thing we did was to add a rattle to the tip of his tail, and we extended the gem on his forehead into a small horn. We then turned his head crest into a bigger and hairier version, which then only left us the colors and shading to do. I am extremely happy with the rendered eyes, and I must say it felt good to finally get some sketching practice in. Flaring Hood, the Paradox Pokemon. This Pokemon does not like to bite anyone and will only do so if you don't leave him another option. If you do manage to anger this Pokemon enough for it to bite you, you must hurry yourself to a healing station because its venom is strong enough to take down an entire group of Tauros. I can definitely see some flaws I made in the proportions and shape language, but I genuinely think this is a change for the better. It might get tough if I get back onto the legendaries though. We're now going to make the future form of Dratini. For this design I did decide to move away slightly from our reference piece, but that did result in quite a lot of fiddling in order to get something I was happy with. Once that finally happened, we added in the hole into his face where we could place in the eye and turned his head crest into more spacey, mechanical ones. We also extended the gem on his head into a more robotic one, and then added 4 segments to divide a few of his body parts. Afterwards we made sure to add a few more segment lines on the back parts of his body, and we gave him a robotic mouth as well. During the color process, I was shortly debating going for a purple variant for the lighted parts, but we changed it into yellow to fit him into the dragon electric typing. Iron Schneck, the Paradox Pokemon. It is thought to be a drone made by an unknown civilization to research space and deeply underwater terrain. It is possibly collecting data to warn their people about natural disasters who are about to happen. Their special antennae are able to pick up vibrations, which they use to predict the possibilities of natural disasters. I could definitely see this Pokemon as an amazing helper on space missions, and even though its design is quite simple, I do think it works as a future form. Let me know if you would rather have the past or the future form of this line. Actually, do that for every Pokemon for today. The second Pokemon of today is Larvitar. On our last 2 pieces we started with the paradox elements from the beginning of the drawing, but from now on I wanted to do something different. In order to make sure the piece would feel like a Larvitar, we decided to first replicate the pose into a believable version of the Pokemon. Once we were satisfied with that, we dropped the opacity of that layer and added on the paradox elements, just like what we did with the tracing method. I've noticed that I'm much less focused on keeping the same elements of the Pokemon as I was with the tracing method. I've also managed to catch myself trying to be a lot more creative with these drawings. For this design I didn't want to build out his dinosaur look, but instead opted into a more caveman aesthetic. This is why the first thing we did was to add a bone onto his head shape. The next thing we added was a tail, and we gave him some sharp tiny fingers. I then got the idea of adding some fur all around his body, which gave me a clear direction for the rest of the piece, a woolly rhino. We added in some sharp toenails, and of course the biggest trademark of rhinos, the horn on his nose. We also added an extra mark to the top of his eye for an even more rough look. Last but not least, we gave him some rocks on his chest and added added another bone, but this time on the tip of his tail. For the colors, we firstly wanted to go for an actual woolly rhino color palette, which is earthy and brown. Even though these colors looked amazing, it didn't feel as much as a Larvitar as I wanted. This is why we changed the colors into regular Larvitar colors and kept this color palette for his shiny. Woolly Horn, the Paradox Pokemon. This Pokemon is known to live in colder areas. Their thick fat and fur allows it to shrug off snowstorms as if it was a light breeze. They slide bones through their fur to store them for later, as they use bone marrow to repair their own horn. I actually really like this piece. It is a simple change, but on the other hand, it does feel like a different Pokemon. I hope you guys aren't mad at me for the last minute color change, but we voted for it on the stream, and now the shiny is absolutely worth hunting. It is now time for the future form of Larvitar. This one was pretty easy to make, since we already had a good reference piece to follow, Iron Thorns. We started out by recreating the pose again, and made sure to first do a shape language study in order to get to know how we have to build this Pokemon up ourselves. This genuinely made it a lot easier to replicate the pose, which meant that this portion of the drawing went by a lot faster than the previous one. After we managed to get the pose down, it was time to add in the futuristic elements. We started out by closing off his legs and added segment lines in the middle of them. We then added 2 holes in the right one and gave his tail a bar of lighted area on each part. After this, we added a segmentation onto his arms and added even more segment lines next to it. We were now able to focus on the most important part of the design, which was to give him big plated body armor, change his mouth into a mechanical one, added a lot of depth into his belly patch, made his feet more mechanical, and added one more big segmentation on the middle of his body to really sell the plated armor piece. We then only had to add minor details like a bunch of segment lines all around his body, and opened up his eye socket in order to bring back the makeup of the regular Larvitar into the design. For the colors, I decided not to follow the color palette of Larvitar, but actually use the color palette of Iron Thorns instead. Iron Crunch, the Paradox Pokemon. These creatures were commonly seen around ruins of what some believe to be cities of an unknown civilization. No one could safely enter the ruins to investigate them, as a group of Iron Crunchers would try to attack and repel all intruders. This made some suspect that they are used as guards by the people of those ruined cities. This is definitely one of my favorite future forms I've made so far, and I could 100% see this as the actual pre-evolution of Iron Thorns. I created a brush set with all my favorite brushes. I use each of them in every drawing that I make, so if you want to draw in the same style as me, I recommend checking out my website. For only €5.99, you can get the Procreate brush set, which you will be able to use in Procreate. It includes an amazing line art brush, a highlight brush which instantly makes your pieces look a lot better, and many other fantastic brushes. I also want to have a written down version of how to create Paradox Pokemon. That's why I created this step-by-step guide. It's easy to follow, and I added a bunch more tips you can use while drawing. You will also get the work files of the 2 Paradox Pokemon we created, and I added 2 work files with just a line art so you can practice coloring and shading. This guide is also available for €5.99 on my website, but since I thought you guys might be interested in buying it together with the brush set, I made it into a combi deal for only €8.99 for the both of them. And that is a 25% discount, so I know what I would do. The third Pokemon of today is Bagon. For this drawing I made a mistake to not do the shape language study first, which resulted in a longer sketching phase. This drawing wasn't going to be difficult though, since we once again had another reference piece to follow, Roaring Moon. We started out by drawing in the head and gave it a few tweaks to get it to fit the right perspective. We then moved on to his body, which wasn't necessarily difficult, but I did have to use our newly found tool a lot. Since the beginning of our sketching arc we started at this video, we didn't draw our shapes perfectly into a 3D atmosphere. Our shapes weren't completely wrong, but sometimes just needed a little tweaking in order to get them right. This is where the liquefy tool came into play. This tool basically makes you able to nudge and pull your drawing around with quite a good amount of precision. I believe this tool will be my savior until I'm actually capable of proper gesture drawing. It was now time to add in the past elements into the design. We started out by giving him a tail and immediately added some spikes on the side of his head. We also extended his belly pattern, gave him claws, some extra teeth, and a few more spikes on multiple areas of his body. For the colors we did the same thing we did for Iron Crunch, which was using the color palette of the real Paradox Pokemon instead of the one of Bagon. Scaly Terror, the Paradox Pokemon. This Pokemon's body is largely made up of muscle. With its strong jaw and beefy legs, it often challenges other Pokemon to battle, and it will not take no for an answer. It often finds itself getting pulverized when trying to challenge two strong Pokemon, like Great Tusk for example. When losing a battle, Scaly Terror keeps a mental note on who it has lost to, so it can rematch them after training. You might bring in the argument of this Pokemon looking more like a fusion between Roaring Moon and Bagon, but I think that is actually what you need this Pokemon to be in order to fit them into one evolution line. We are now moving on to the future form of Bagon. Luckily, we did remember to do the shape language study this time. I have watched a bunch of tutorials where they always mention this part of the sketching phase, and I always knew they were right, but it never really clicked with my brain until now. This is definitely something I've noticed with a lot of elements during the last few months of drawing. We are finally starting to undergo the things the amazing YouTubers talk about in their videos. After our quick study was done, we started out by firstly drawing in the head shape again. It took me some time to get everything to look right, but we eventually managed to pull it off. The body quickly followed, since it basically consists of 3 circular shapes with only 2 lines connecting it to the head. We then simply added in the arms and moved on to the futuristic elements. I must admit that I took a huge amount of inspiration from the design of Iron Crunch. Especially the middle part of his body is almost identical, and I did play around with the exact same arms, but those felt too similar, so I didn't use them. The most important parts of this transformation were in fact the middle part of his body. The segmentation in his neck and legs, and the segment lines on his head crest really helped the robotic look as well. I did face one struggle point, which was what to do with the legs. I didn't want to just add the same hole into them like we did for Iron Crunch. This is why I decided to place them more on the outside of the leg. The colors were basically the same, except for the lighted parts, which we made blue to play into his part of water typing. Iron Engine, the Paradox Pokemon. This Pokemon appears to be the result of humans finally figuring out how to create an engine purely running on water. It is capable of generating extreme amounts of energy, which it must release with high-speed water blasts. Rumors say that the creator of this Pokemon mysteriously disappeared upon discovering it actually worked. I am actually happy with this design. I feel like it's a good balance of Bagon and a robot. The final Pokemon for today is Beldum. I must admit that I completely forgot this Pokemon was a Pseudo Legendary as well, because I was in the understanding that there was only one available spot for a Pseudo Legendary in every region. Well, my bad. Let's start on the shape study. Beldum exists out of a circle for his head, a circle-shaped plate for his bottom, a triangular cylinder, and a rectangle for the piece on his head. Once we figured that out, we started on our drawing. We drew in a circle for his head and a circle where we would place the bottom of his body. We then added some thickness to the bottom shape and connected it to his head. I followed it up by adding a segment in his neck and by drawing in the rectangular shape on his back. After adding in the eye, it was time to make changes to the basic shapes. We did this in order to make them look like the roughed up Beldum we know. This took a little bit of tweaking, but wasn't actually difficult. The only thing we had to do was to add the segment lines and redraw the basic shapes to fit the squared look. Once all of these elements were in place, it was time to move on to the past elements. My idea for the typing was either Psychic Rock or Rock Grass. I know the second typing wouldn't be possible with the Paradox rules, but it would have been awesome. Luckily, for all the rule-loving people, we did a poll on stream and democracy decided on the first typing. The changes we made weren't even that big either, and for the most part we just roughed out the elements he has on the regular design, which eventually turned his Beldum into an ancient looking rock. I did decide to add a crack in the middle of his body to spice up the design and fit him even closer to the part Psychic typing. For the colors I did decide to move away from the Paradox rules because I felt like a desert color palette would fit this Pokemon perfectly. I did bring the regular colors back for a shiny though. Holy Sentinel, the Paradox Pokemon. This Pokemon is often found in Sky Pillar, Thea Sky Ruins and the Hoenn Desert Ruins, guarding the legendary Pokemon that lie within these structures. Its energy core can be seen through its midsection, and if struck, it will cause Holy Sentinel to briefly get stunned. I am extremely happy with the end result of this Pokemon. I can only imagine how freaking amazing the evolutions of this guy will look like. It was now time for the final transformation of today, the future form of Beldum. We did do a shape study again, but after we were done with that, I got completely lost with what I wanted to do with this design. Beldum already looks a lot like a future form, and I didn't just want to add a few tiny changes and call it a day. This made me try a few different ideas, and I'm not sure if these designs were the result of me being tired or if I just was trolling a little. We tried to turn Beldum into a missile, which would have been cool as a concept, but my execution was horrible. Luckily I did see that during the drawing process, so we changed into a different route. My first idea was to turn Beldum into a post-apocalyptic version, but like I said, that would have been just a basic rusted Beldum. This is why I decided to completely change his body into a more WoW-y looking version. We separated his head from his body and added some arms to the design as well. We also wanted to find a way for it to move, and I didn't want to just make him float because I wanted it to look like the last survivor, which had to be rebuilt. This made me give him a wheel under his body and finished up the rest of his design with a bunch of plated, reused metals. I will say that at a certain point, I didn't believe this piece would come together. And to be fair, the only way to save this being a future form of Beldum was to use its regular colors. I do think this genuinely might have saved this design, but let me know if you think this was too much, or if it was actually pretty cool to see such a drastic change for once. Iron Warbot, the Paradox Pokemon. In vast, enormous fields of an unknown civilization, a lot of dysfunctioning, seriously damaged iron warbots were found lying everywhere. The few still functioning iron warbots were quick to attack, leading some to believe they were used as a common soldier that people of this civilization used to engage in massive wars. Some individuals were seen trying to attach parts of their fallen comrades to themselves, but it rarely was done successfully. I don't know about this design. It is kinda cute, but it is also kinda weird. I will say that his evolutions are probably going to be a bit different, unless you guys appear to actually love this design. Well, these were the first stage Pseudo Legendaries from generations 1 to 3. Tomorrow we'll release the first stage starters of our Collabo region, so definitely go check that out. Let me know which design was your favorite, and goodbye!